I've got another question for you on entitlement. So, is it entitlement if a grandparent wants to see their grandchildren? We've been meeting over the course of just over a year now and realized that we're actually working through a lot of estrangement dynamics that we have estrangement dynamics with one another and we set off triggers and things like that. So we just really try to work through them. I want to pick up a little bit what we talked about last month, which was what did we talk about? We talked about the parental guilt trip, parental control, stuff like that. I want to revisit some of those things, but I want to start because this is coming up a lot. I want to start asking all of you what entitlement is. Who wants to start? Jillian, Aaliyah, Dr. Ruth, do you have an opinion or do you know what entitlement is or examples or anything like that?
I feel like entitlement is feeling like you're deserving something that, or like you should be given something without putting the work in. So you're entitled to a relationship with somebody. You're entitled for them to bend to your will, or like you're entitled to like that front row parking spot, something where it's like that it doesn't necessarily belong to you, but you feel like you deserve it.
Some special treatment.
Yeah.
Do you have an example when it comes to like estrangement, maybe for your Gen Z generation? What do you feel your generation's entitlement would be?
I think our entitlement, and I now this is going, I think entitlement can be both good and bad, where it either subjugates change or it like creates tension. And I think that in a way, my generation does feel entitled to speaking our opinions and sticking up for ourselves and finally putting our like the foot down, the obviously like hyperbole of a foot of just what we deserve and what we demand, and like, okay, this is something that we're now going to talk about, such as mental health or such as estrangement, instead of like sweeping it under the rug. Now we're, I feel like we in my generation feel entitled to the opportunity to speak our truth and to speak our mind and let people know what's going on instead of suffering in silence because it makes us look weak.
I'm
Where do you
curious.
think that came from?
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
that was my question.
Okay.
How did it start?
I think it's an amalgamation of every generation changing from the one before them, learning from each other's mistakes, even in the smallest ways, and watching like that pain and having, I think the connection that we have now with social media and having that ready access to everything is a boon and a bane to our generation, where now we're more connected than ever. We don't feel as isolated of like, I'm the only one going through this. I'm the only one who understands how I feel. And I'm the only one who would really get the like this, so isolation would happen. And now instead it's posted and more people are like, wait a second, I feel exactly like that and I'm not alone. So I think it, the community that has been built through communication, whether good or bad, has created this good entitlement, I think, in my generation, where now it's like, hey, wait a second, this isn't right, and being able to call out like things that we want to change. I mean, obviously there's two sides to that, but for now, focusing on estrangement and the mental health aspect of it, I think that that comes from being like, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be miserable and like just drinking my sorrows away all the time, like suffering in silence. That sounds terrible. I'll bitch about it on Twitter.
The millennials, so Aaliyah's generation is actually labeled as the therapy generation. So it is interesting that you kind of feel entitled to be able to, speak about mental health and yeah, it's very loud in your generation. Yeah, absolutely. Aaliyah, did you want to comment on that?
I don't know. I guess I've never had a sense of entitlement, but maybe I just don't even know that I do because I'm a millennial. It's just, I always felt like I could just do what I want, especially when I finally moved out of my mom's house. I felt this like new sense of freedom that I was like, finally was able to find myself. And so I felt like I was able to do kind of whatever I wanted to do in a sense. So I just didn't feel like I felt like I could kind of forge my own path in the sense that no one in my family or before me had done. And so it just felt really freeing when I got out on my own, that I could make my own decisions, that like one time I decided not to vote because I was like, everybody was telling me I needed to vote, you need to vote, because I was like, but I'm not educated enough. Let me take this year and educate myself so I can make an educated vote, and I'm not just voting like my mom voted like I did the last 3 years. I was like, let me take this time to educate myself so I can know what my opinions are. And so I think that's like, finally I felt a sense of entitlement in that way, because I finally was taking my own opinions and generating my own opinions, where before I felt like I was just kind of under the, like, doing what everybody else was doing rather than making decisions for myself. And I think that was how I see entitlement, is that like I finally am entitled to my own opinions, my own life, making my own life decisions now.
Well, I felt
It's
that
almost
too
like you're entitled to
in my
freedom.
20s.
Yeah.
Yeah, I felt
What,
that
Jill?
same way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I said it's almost like like feeling entitled to freedom in a way.
Yeah, Dr. Ruth, you felt that too going
Yeah.
into your 20s, 30s?
Yeah, I grew up in a conservative family. My dad was a minister and mom stayed at home, so it was very sheltered kind of life. And I am a very free spirit, and it was hard for me. So I was really glad to had fun in my 20s. I had too much fun in my 20s. I'm surprised I'm alive. Actually, I think that often. I'm like, I don't know how I'm alive. But yeah.
Dr.
I
Ruth, the
remember,
party animal.
yeah, I had some fun. Yeah. All this gray
There's a
hair comes
reason we
from.
weren't born in the same generation.
I know. Uh, yeah, I felt the same way.
Okay, so every generation feels entitled to breaking away, having their own freedom, making their own decisions, living their own life. Okay, so we all felt this way. Yeah, I think it's unanimous. We all felt this way. You know, it's interesting though when you mentioned like mental health being out there, you know, and just being so open and public about it. It was so different for us. That is one big difference, because it was seen as psychotic if you saw a therapist. There was something wrong with you if you had to talk to somebody about your problems. You just didn't do that. And you know, there were jokes about being taken away in a straitjacket, you know, to the funny farm. I mean, it was a very big stigmatism to ever come out and admit that you needed help from another.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think the self-help movement, you know, self-help books and everything else, I mean, I think that was a product of probably the early 90s. And everybody just really gravitated towards that movement because we finally had books of like how to improve yourself, how to make yourself better. And I think we were just very hungry for that. I don't know that I feel like your younger generations are doing that like we did. The hunger for the self-help and improving yourself on your own versus needing help from another. Can you guys
I
comment on that?
disagree. I completely
Okay.
disagree, because what is self-help with not asking for the help that you need? You also get assignments in therapy where there's books that you are recommended to read, and there's things that you can do on the outside time that not only like improve upon what you get out of any therapy session that you go to, that improves your life and gives you those coping skills and the understanding of your like reactions and interactions, that is all self-motivated because you get yourself to therapy. So I think that all of this maybe is a love child of that therapy or self-help movement, because there are still self-help books. Like I still have like, I may not be religious, but I still got the book like Girl Wash Your Face and Girl Stop Apologizing. It's very empowering to read those despite like coming from any angle. And that was on my own time. Atomic Habits is another great book that I picked up and I really love. All at the recommendation of a therapist, because I sought that out. Like just yesterday, I finally am utilizing my insurance to get back on medication for like my bipolar and everything. So like, I think it's that self-motivation that is still present while still asking for help from somebody else. So I think that like therapy is in a way self-help, And I think it did spawn from the like, okay, wait, there is improvements that I can make, but I don't think I can necessarily do this on my own.
Yeah. I agree with what Jillian's saying, but I felt like I was in the middle of both generations because it in the beginning, because I was adopted, I was supposed to see a therapist and supposed to, and I refused to do it because I felt ashamed of doing it when I was younger, just because of that stigmatism and stuff. And I felt like I wouldn't even talk. I would just sit there in silence for an hour because I didn't want to talk to anybody. And I was really shut out for a very long time in my life, I think, because of that. I wasn't able to open up to anybody for a very long time. It wasn't until like my mid 20s when that I feel like the like self-development movement was becoming more and more out there that I was like, oh, I do I do need to work on myself. I do need like I'm not perfect the way I am and I'm not happy the way I am. And so I do need to talk to somebody about it. And so I still like probably I still haven't ever seen a therapist just maybe because of that, but I have had a coach and a mentor and people who have helped me develop like giving me resources like Jillian was talking about. And I think it's really important to like talk to somebody just to have that, I don't know, other voice because you can only have so many voices in your head where you need to get out of it.
And your head becomes like an echo chamber too. So like I could read all the self-help books in the world, but then at the end of the day, I could still be convinced that my cat's mad at me because it sneezed wrong. But then I like if I talk to my friend about it, they're like, dude, it's a cat. I know that's an extreme example of it, but like getting out of that headspace because you can absolutely spiral out of control if it's just you thinking about it. So being able to have that sounding board, I think is like uh it's like self-help evolved 2.0 in a way because you're the one doing talk therapy. It's you driven. They're just kind of there to help guide and like reflect back what you're saying and kind of helping you come to that realization without sitting there and being like, you're actually feeling this. And you're like, oh yeah, I am feeling it. No, you come to that with your own like recognition, I think.
Okay, so big question then. Do you have the self-recognition that everything is your work to do? Anything that bothers you is your responsibility to overcome, that we don't control others. We'll never control our kids. We'll never control our parents, our spouses, our neighbors. We can't change other people. So do you understand that your happiness it's 100% solely resides with you? Or is that maybe where the entitlement comes in to kick your parents to the curb because they aren't doing something right?
But wouldn't that entitlement come in with the parents as well, being entitled to control like what you're doing and entitled to have you reporting back to them still? Like, yeah, there is an entitlement to take a step away and become your own person. I think there is that recognition of I'm not happy where I'm at and I'm going to go find myself and having that pushback. I mean, obviously, everybody comes from very different experiences, but I think in a way that entitlement to control other people is a damning force.
And it's
100%.
like
It's on both
it,
sides. Go ahead.
yeah. I think that recognition came in and out the last like 10 years of like realizing it's 100% because it's always easy to fall back into blaming somebody else. And I struggled with this when I became like when I started becoming a leader at my work. So instead of just being a teacher, I became an admin and was having to lead other people. And I think that's when I more realized like, oh, it is on me, where before I kind of just fell in line and it was so easy to blame the director or the other teacher or something else. Where when I had to step up into more of a leadership role, I was like, oh, like I do have to take 100% responsibility no matter what happens on the other side, even if it is somebody else's fault. I need to take responsibility for my part in it. And I think that's a hard lesson to learn because it is so easy to blame and it's really easy to just say, oh, it's the other person's fault. They stopped talking to me or something like that. I noticed that as this situation came up with my mom and having to find a home and her moving into the next phase of her life. And boy, I fell into that with the siblings in the situation, right? Like, oh, you should be helping, you should be helping. Why aren't you? But have I called them? I never called my mom's son. I never called him because like I did 10 years ago and he never picked up my call. And so now I'm still bitter. So I'm like, well, he should be involved. He should call. But then I had to look at it and say, maybe I should call him, but I don't want to. So I didn't. So it's a very strange place to be. And I feel like it's a lifetime of learning that what did you call it? Entitlement, feeling entitled. I think we're always feeling like, oh, it should be on the other person or something. I just ran into that here and I still feel entitled like it should be on him. So to reach out, it's his mother. So
And he's older.
he knows, it's like he knows something is going on and she's not doing as well. Why isn't he reaching out? But I do have his phone number. Why aren't I reaching out? So
What does keep you from calling him?
because I feel like he should call. Like, he knows his mother is sick. He knows like
But he's
she's
not going to.
huh?
Look, just because we're enlightened doesn't make us Buddha, okay? She's allowed to hold on to a little bit of resentment. Goodness gracious, we're healed, but not completely.
Yeah.
I just felt like there's other triggers, right? Because I've wanted him to be a part of my life this whole time. And I just felt because we were the adopted kids, like there was no real relationship built there. And in my mind, there was always a relationship built. I thought he was going to be the one who walks me down the aisle. I thought he would be more involved in my life as more of a like man figure in my life. And as soon as he like moved in with his wife and moved away, he like this part of the family didn't exist anymore. And I was like, did I do something? And I could never put my finger on it. So I just made one phone call. And after that, I just couldn't do it anymore.
Mm.
And I think that's what's so hard. Go ahead, Jill.
I wanted to just point out like the difference of like, do you feel that that's like an entitlement thing, or do you think that that's closer to a fear of rejection again?
Probably both. Like I feel like I don't know if it's even entitlement. I feel like he needs to take responsibility. And then, yeah, the other thing is the fear of rejection. Like, will he even care enough to call me back again?
Mm-hmm.
It's scary putting yourself out there,
Yeah.
especially in like such a heavy situation. I don't like envy the position that you're in.
Yeah.
And I think parents could say exactly what you just said. You know, we have this image in our minds of how our life is going to play out with our adult children in our lives. You know, we have this play that continues. And when that doesn't happen, you know, there's just a big disconnect. And it's very difficult to process when you lose the life that you imagined, you know, with
Right.
your child in it. So now is that entitlement to where, you know, they owe you that life, or, you know, Jillian, you want to say something?
Oh, I was just gonna take notes. I wasn't gonna interrupt you. But now let me close my notes app so I can see you. Okay. So I do have something to ask about that. With that, like, is it not an adaptation that we should make? Like, isn't that just like being stuck in the same rut and so stubborn that it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy where like, oh, your life didn't turn out like this, so you're going to throw a tantrum and like cut everybody off, or like my way or the highway it, which I mean, obviously that's with every generation. I'm not saying just parents, just kids. I do that all the time. Like if something goes wrong and I'm like, no, obviously that's never going to happen now. And it's like, okay, but you could just get your glasses shipped to you next week instead of getting them on Friday. And it's like, no, I'll just never get glasses again. I'll stick with my like old prescription because I just, whatever, it didn't work out. Or would it be better to just adapt and be like accepting of like, okay, cool, this is not how my child turned out, but I'm going to accept them and love them for who they are. And I think that could go for many different situations of like, why is it so why are we all as humans stuck in such a way of that entitlement of seeing our lives this certain way? And like, if it's not going to be met to that standard, then that person needs to get out, either conform or leave, like, and I'm a rigid person when it comes to that too. Like, I've had to check myself a couple of times and be like, you're acting a little crazy right now, Jill.
Yeah, and that was a process for me. I mean, initially, when my daughter went no contact, it was like, no, 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 no. We talk an hour, at least an hour every week, and we laugh and we share what's going on. And you call me every Tuesday at such and such time. No, this is how we do this. This is how we do this. And then it was like, no, Mom, I'm not doing this anymore. And honestly, it took me a while to step out of it, to get out of my pain. Of course, I've done a ton of healing. And just now put myself in her shoes, remember when I was her age, and say, she's at this stage in her life where she needs freedom. She needs to experience her life. She needs to discover what's real and true for her and go her own direction. It was very difficult to let go. But, now having her back, realizing that's not what I wanted at all, but it probably was entitlement for me, if I would call it that, to say I thought I was entitled to her at least 1 hour every week, like we always did. But ultimately letting her go and find her own way, and then choosing to come back to, a happy mom, to where we can now have this really great relationship, was the best thing that I ever could have done. But it's hard to see it initially, because it just feels like the rug gets ripped out from underneath you. You're just not prepared for it.
Yeah.
So Aaliyah, then I want to give an example. Last time we talked about the parental guilt trip and things that trigger like the parental guilt trip. Now, when you were here visiting me and you only stayed here for a week and then you were gone, then you came back that final week, and I had made that comment to you of, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're leaving already. It feels like you just got here. And for you, that kind of triggered a parental guilt trip a little bit. You had to talk to Ryan about it and say, oh, was I supposed to do more than I did?
Right.
Now, I don't think I would have said anything differently.
Yeah.
I mean, I felt that way. It wasn't like I was trying to guilt trip you or say, no, don't go, stay, but you took it that way. So
Yeah.
was that my responsibility to say the right thing to you, or like, how on earth could I possibly have navigated this? And there's a saying in the parental groups of, well, damned if I do, damned if I don't. And it feels kind of like that. Is like, well, I was being genuine with, I can't believe you're leaving already. You just got here. So your comment to that really kind of surprised me and just made me feel like, oh my gosh, you took that as a trigger of a guilt trip?
I think it's more like me needing to be responsible and asking or something, or just like or just understanding the expectations. I think when there's no like expectations set or something, that's when it kind of can get off. And you don't know how somebody grows up, and you don't know what could be triggering to them. And so I don't think it's your responsibility. I think I could have been just more open about it at the time, like, oh no, were we supposed to spend more time together? But then at the same time, it's like we're living our own lives in the same situation, right? So I think I think it was just something that was like more from my past and triggering, that it had nothing to do with you. It's just like I didn't want to like disappoint you. That's all. I think it was
And
more.
you couldn't have, but
Yeah.
I think it's just, it takes us back to think that that was a trigger. I mean,
Right.
I would have never known to think that could have triggered something,
Right.
something like that.
And it could be something like, oh, because the time did go by so quick, it's crazy. And it was something like, oh, I wanted to spend more time with you too. So it was me and my guilt being like, should have I spent more time here? How should have I done it better? I'm always thinking, because I'm such a like free spirit, and I'm not very good at planning, even though like in my mind I want to plan so bad. I get this journal and I get my book out and I write things down and just yeah, we were supposed to go to Costco before this call today and I stayed in bed and drank my coffee. So just those things. It's just like it was almost guilt for me too. Like maybe I should have planned my trip better and just holding myself to this weird standard.
So do we know this? Do we know that it's our responsibility to maintain what's going on in our head at all times? That's our responsibility to be happy or to create our own misery. I mean, there's nothing somebody else can do to ever make us happy.
Right. Yeah. No, it is.
I think there's an sorry, Leah.
Go ahead. No, I finished.
I think there's an interesting saying that's been gaining a lot of popularity lately. That's like, your traumas are not your fault, but your reactions to them are your responsibility.
Yeah.
Then we take it one step further, coming from the self-help era. Seeing that your trauma is for your highest good and your ultimate personal growth and soul's purpose, seeing that your family was just your perfect destiny. Everything that happened to you happened for a reason versus being a victim and it happened to you. It happened for you.
Well, yeah, I think that's what a lot of like my issue with my mother came from was like not only the guilt trip, but then it was always the victimization of never her fault. Anything that happened had absolutely nothing to do with her actions or her decisions. It was always poor me. And like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that this is happening to me. And it'd be like, well, you just drove your car into a ditch because you were looking at your phone or something like that. And it's like, oh, I can't believe this is happening to me. Like, what rotten luck. No, like the world's against me. And it's like, well, maybe some self-reflection could have been had. And like even when our estrangement happened, like just to revisit that topic of my stepdad was quite literally physically abusive to me to the point of like leaving marks on Christmas Eve and like where I felt like he threatened my life. And yet she's like, I don't understand why this is happening to me because she chose to stay. After I begged my mom to leave him, she chose to stay. And oh my gosh, I don't understand why my daughter doesn't talk to me. Why is this happening to me? Like, do we really have to sit there and not self-reflect at all to kind of get that? Like, so I think that it is like a responsibility of reflection as well, of like not constantly playing that victim game of like, yeah, sure, there are bad things that happen to you out of nowhere and freak accidents happen, or like even just silly mistakes that you make, but it's also taking that responsibility of like, yeah, I effed up.
My mom will never be somebody who can self-reflect.
Yeah.
I mean, she just won't. It wasn't part of her generation. And it's still, like I asked her, if she wanted to I have an app for daily text affirmations. I asked her if she would like to receive them. And she said, well, what's a daily text affirmation? I said, well, it's just something that kind of reminds you to, think positive and be happy. She's like, oh no, I don't have time for that in my life. So she's just not somebody who'll ever do that. So when I call her and talk to her, I have to rise to that occasion. I really do. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, and I have to show her grace, and I have to be the one who's more patient and the one who does a little bit more work. And I don't get it right every time, and sometimes I'll even say, Mom, you're driving me crazy. I got to get off the phone. I'm hungry. Maybe I'm hangry, but either way, you're driving me crazy and I got to go. And she'll laugh and I'll laugh. I mean, honestly. So there are some people that if we want to have them in our lives, for whatever reason, we're going to be the ones that have to do that work. I mean, Dr. Ruth, you must be exhausted from that. That's your job.
Yes. It is very tiring. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you find that it not only is it in your work, then it's like all around you? I mean, does it feel that way to you?
A little bit sometimes, yeah. And I've noticed that I'm more I'm an extrovert, but I'm tapping into my introverted side because I just have to escape. I feel like, yeah, do a lot of more self-care. Avoid.
No contact, avoid.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. So who knows? And that brings to mind maybe people are feeling like I'm estranging them because I'm not intentionally. Well, I guess I kind of am in some way. Um, but it's just I'm on overload a lot of the time now. So I just,
I think we need to be cautious of mistaking boundaries for estrangement, especially if it's
yeah,
boundaries for self-care as well.
that's a good point.
But
Yeah,
when
that's
it
what it
happens
feels
to
like.
us, what'd you
It
say?
feels like that. It feels like boundaries, but I don't know what it looks like to somebody else.
I was just going to say that it's self-care and boundaries when we're doing it. But when
Yeah.
it's being done to us, it's estrangement and it's out of line,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do we communicate that with each other? I'm really curious about the four of us on the call today. Like, I'm curious is there anything I've done or said that has been triggering? Because Lisa and Aaliyah were talking about, the trip and what kind of triggered just little comments, but they're not so little. They've meant something. So I'm just curious if the four of us need to just ask each other or say, I'm open to hearing if there's anything I've said or done that's been triggering for anybody. Be real curious about it.
I think we
And if
address
there,
pretty much
yep,
on the call when we're on the call with each other. I think
okay,
if there is something or obviously Lisa and I it had to be a little while to realize what had been done, right? After, because I didn't notice it until I got home, like after the long flight and stuff, and it like kind of hit me later, like when she like said it and like how quickly the time went by and then the guilt set in and I got some sleep.
yeah,
And so I think it's like sometimes it's maybe not right away, but I feel like on this call, we're really good at addressing it either right away or on our next call together after realizing, whoa, that did trigger me in a way or something.
okay. I hope so because that's why we're doing what we're doing. I
Right.
think a big part for me is, yeah,
Yeah.
so we can play things out here.
Well, and I think an important part of this message is it's happening in all of our relationships. It's just not parent-child. I mean, we're working this dynamic in so many different relationships. I mean, my mom's going to get on my nerves. My husband's going to get on my nerves. When my daughter came back, I just said, "Look, I'm not walking on eggshells. I'm going to piss you off again. I know it. I absolutely know that I'm going to step on your toes again." And in that moment, you're just going to have to take care of you. Do whatever it is that you want to do. Yell at me, whatever it is you need to do. Ask your sister how to yell at me. She's very good at it. Take cues from her. But I mean, that's just the reality is that when you're living in a world with other people, and we do, we're going to step on toes without any intention whatsoever of hurting somebody else just
Yeah.
because we're not aware of their triggers. And it's not our responsibility to make sure that everything we say lands so softly with people when we don't have any idea what their triggers are.
Right.
But I don't think people really understand that when you're upset by something, it's in you.
It is. Yep.
And that person was a gift in that moment to help you notice something about yourself or work through something and heal something in yourself. Like Jillian, what came to mind when you were talking about that, like with your mom and, boyfriends and stuff like that, and even in the past. And, you've been through a lot as a little kid, and that's a rough life for a little kid. But taking it to, okay, what is this moment teaching me? Why does this have to happen in my life? It happened. We can't do anything about the past. It happened. So now what do you do with it? Well, that must have given you the most incredible contrast to know what a good guy looks like.
You'd be surprised, actually. Um, I think that it caused a lot of pain in me, and I think that it, in a way of like trying to separate myself so far from my mom in that situation, I kind of came full circle like a little horseshoe and started emulating like the things that I didn't want to be out of a place of pain. And then I think it took a lot of like healing, a lot of not making great decisions, not choosing the greatest people to surround myself with to finally like realize my worth and come to terms with the fact that like just because I felt abandoned and I felt like I was worthless from somebody who was incredibly important in my life didn't make me worthless or didn't make me any less valuable than the days that I was her favorite person, or I was super valuable to her, going on road trips, doing things that a mother and daughter would do. Um, so I think like after a bunch of healing, it definitely has given me really strong and maybe too strong of boundaries, because now I think I'm at the point in my life where I'm realizing it's a little too easy to cut people off. And that's where that fine line of like boundaries and estrangement come. Um, but I think after healing, yeah. But I also think that like going through things like that, it does a lot more damage than a lot of people are willing to admit. Especially like some of the doing the job that I do and hearing some of the mothers that call in and us on like domestic abuse, and I can hear the kids in the background, and that's triggering for me because I understand that that's going to be a long-term thing that those children deal with, and that brings it back to really, it kind of steals my resolve even more to understand what is still broken and why those decisions still affect me to this day.
But you're only 29. We all
Yeah.
went through this too. We went through the boyfriends, the ex-husbands. I mean, we went through it. And this is what you do, you know, and you're right. You do realize, okay, if it's very easy to sit in my meditation chair by myself, but I got to take this out into the world and actually practice this in front of other people. It was very easy to be alone and divorced and single. It was very easy.
Oh, it was so easy.
Very difficult to be in relationship. It is difficult. It's so easy to write people off. It's difficult to be in relationship. I've got another question for you on entitlement. So is it entitlement if a grandparent wants to see their grandchildren?
That's so loaded. Like
Yeah.
it really depends. I think that like there's no yes or no answer. It's case by case, similar to estrangement. Like if say my mom raised from the dead and I had a child and she was demanding to see it, I would just be like, "Well, you crazy lady, absolutely not." Like for one, like let's say she never had passed away in the first place and we were still estranged. We don't have a relationship and I don't know how you're going to be around my child. But say it's like my stepmom and I'm just doing it out of spite, then yeah, she absolutely has an entitlement to see my child because she's been there. Sure, we butted heads and I was an absolutely nightmarish teenager to deal with for her. So like I think that it's just so situational based, and like there's no right answer to give in this.
I agree. Aaliyah, what do you think?
Yeah, it is. It's really hard because you don't know what that of course as a as a grandparent, you're like, yeah, I want to see my grandkids. I have a right to see my grandkids, but at the same time, your child has a right to protect their kids in whatever way that they feel is right. So if they feel like they're protecting them from not having a relationship with you, then that's their choice.
Dr. Ruth?
Well, as a grandparent who's not seeing grandchildren, um, that is a loaded question. I I can see both sides now. I couldn't before. Sorry. Been sick. Um, because I went to court to try to see him. And didn't get visitation. Sorry. I'm gonna have to cough and take a drink. Oh,
Okay, that's all right. Yeah, I'm in the middle of this too, and it's tough. And anytime, and Dr. Ruth will come back. So anytime somebody in the community, you know, a grandparent talks about missing their grandkids, I mean, I see the anguish. I feel the anguish and how difficult that is. And, you know, I don't have grandkids, so it's probably easy for me, but I do see both sides of it. I see in the situation of abuse, you know, of course you're like, no, you're not taking care of my kids. But 99.9% of children feel like they're going to be a better parent than they were parented. I mean, we all thought we were going to do a better job than our parents did. And they might be one of the best resources for your grandkids, especially in this day and time when anyone you hire is prisoner to their phone. There was a news, this was on the news, it just came to my mind, but there was a nanny that lived in a high rise with a family, and she gets on the elevator with this 2-year-old little girl that she was taking care of, and she was on her phone the whole time. Well, she gets off the elevator, the little girl stays on, and she doesn't even realize it. The little girl is taken up to the penthouse that's unfinished, and she falls to her death. It just, situations like that, just in this day and age, I don't know who you trust to take care of your children more than I think a grandparent. Again, if they weren't abused or, in a situation like that, we're not talking about those extreme situations. But even in that, maybe a grandparent in that situation is more healed because of what they've been through, and they've had time, and now they, skipping that generation, and I don't know, statistically, maybe they aren't abusive anymore, but I don't know, you still have to get rid of through the parent who just can't see it any differently because they were in the
I just
trauma.
don't think I'd trust it. Like that, it goes back to what we've talked about in the past of like, yeah, sure, you could say these things, and like it's with any relationship. These things that you're saying are nice, but there needs to be actions and like proof behind it. And if it's my child, I am like, I don't have one, so I can't speak from experience. But from what people say about having children and how much they love them, I don't think that I could fathom putting my child through the abuse that I went through. So I don't think I could ever trust that child alone with my estranged parent. Just simply because, like, in the back of my mind, it would always be like, God, I hope they're not going through that right now. Like, I couldn't even go to the store and do that, in my own personal opinion. Like, putting myself in this hypothetical, I think if I were to want to protect my child, I don't think that I could trust the fact that they wouldn't do the same cycle over and over again.
Okay.
I think that makes sense. But I think the majority of parents, I just don't think we're talking about being in that type of abusive situation. But Dr. Ruth, can you talk?
Yeah, I'm going to try to talk again, but sorry. This could be a whole nother roundtable discussion, because there's a lot to it. I totally get Jillian's viewpoint. And in a situation like that, I wouldn't want my child either to see, if I had been raised by an abusive mother, I wouldn't want her to be alone with my child either. And the thing is, like, my daughter wasn't abused. I have other grandkids, step grandkids, that their mom and dad are fine with me being with them, and my nieces are fine with me being with their kids. I have a niece that has 2 children, and she's fine with me being with her kids. What I worry about is that I had a relationship with them, and then all of a sudden I'm not in the picture, and I don't know what they think happened. So I worry about that event, and that is trauma for them. If they had a relationship, any grandchild that has a relationship with a grandparent, and it's a good relationship, that's traumatic for that child to either think they've been abandoned or rejected, or the grandparent has died when they haven't. That's a big loss for that grandchild. And that was the biggest, hardest thing for me to think about and accept. And I'm still concerned about the impact of that. Yeah, I still am concerned. That's my biggest concern. And that's why I went to court. Was because I wanted them to know they mattered. I didn't know what was being said. And I wanted to try to be able to continue that relationship for them to not have a negative impact about my relationship with my daughter. That was a different relationship. I could have kept that separate. But what's happened. we'll see. We'll see. I may never see him again. I've accepted that I might not. I don't have expectations of anything. So it's hard. There's a lot to it. It's very different having the estrangement from an adult child than it is having the loss of that relationship with the grandchild. That's just completely different.
Yeah. There's and I'll share the link once this hits YouTube. I'll put the link in the description on this. But I was watching a video, I think it was Dr. Phil, and there was an extreme movement to the other side because of, you know, the estrangement movement. There's a movement for everything nowadays. You know, everybody was abused in abusive relationships, and that's the reason for so many estranged families and the no contact. Well, that prompted a movement to the other side that's called gentle parenting. And this is where parents don't parent at all. There's no guardrails, there's no discipline, there's no boundaries with these kids. And of course, no surprise, it's not working. It's completely fallen apart because kids do need boundaries. They do need guardrails. No, they don't need abused. They need parenting. They just do. But the other side of this, of what's happening, is the parents that are now living with these kids who weren't parented and they've lost control, they now live with this extreme fear of not being able to parent, but yet seeing this out of control kid, not knowing how to get them back. And, you know, now kids younger and younger have these phones in their hands. And now everything this parent does gets recorded by that kid. I mean, can you imagine? Your kid now from a very young age is recording every single thing you do as a parent. And now the parents have so much anxiety because they just can't win.
Yeah, I've worked with parents that that's happened, that their kids are having the phones and they're recording them, and yeah, trying to get the parents in trouble. And it's a big thing happening right now. You're right.
Wow. We thought
Yeah.
we had it hard.
Yeah.
That would be bad.
Posting
That would be
things. Yeah, it's trying legal routes to get, it's unbelievable what's happening.
wow. Well, we covered a lot of ground, and I know a lot of you are losing your voices. Well, you all, thank you. I feel like we got some things wrapped up. I really was surprised that we had never talked about entitlement, because that seems like such a big word, but you know, we don't really know why everybody's entitled or nobody's entitled. And, you know, it was just kind of a confusing thing. But thank you guys for shedding some light on that and everything that we talked about today. It feels like every conversation kind of opens a can of worms to a new set of conversations. So I'm going to let you guys go, but I appreciate you being here and enjoy the rest of your weekend. All right. So grateful
Good to
for
see
all
you
of you.
guys.